March 15th, 1969. Tommy Scalise had been photographing celebrities for 8 years, made good money selling shots to the tabloids. That's exactly why he thought he could laugh about Frank Sinatra's dead father. The Sands Hotel parking lot, 2:30 a.m. Tommy raised his camera, snapped 3 photos of a grieving Frank stumbling to his car, and shouted, "Hey Frankie, Daddy's really sleeping with the fishes now." What happened in the next 10 minutes became the most buried story in Hollywood history. 3 major newspapers killed the photos. The LAPD closed the case in 48 hours. And for 34 years, when people talked about Frank Sinatra's power, they never mentioned Tommy Scalise, the photographer who laughed at a son's grief. The night Frank Sinatra proved some jokes cost everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tommy's flash went off twice more before he realized the parking lot had gone dead quiet. The usual Vegas night sounds, distant slot machines, late-night revelers, passing cars, seemed to vanish into the desert air. Even Frank had stopped moving, his hand frozen on the Cadillac's door handle. "Jesus, Tommy." His assistant Jerry lowered his own camera, voice barely a whisper. "What the hell did you just say?" But Tommy was riding the adrenaline high that came with getting the money shot. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board himself, caught vulnerable and raw outside the Sands at 2:30 a.m. The old man had died that afternoon, and here was Frankie, drunk and broken, stumbling to his car like any other grieving son. Except this grieving son was worth a fortune to the right tabloid. "Relax, Jerry. It's just business." Tommy adjusted his telephoto lens, tracking Frank's movements. Besides, what's he gonna do? Sue me? I got rights, baby. Freedom of the press and all that. That's when Tommy noticed the Lincoln Continental sliding up behind them, headlights off. Then another car, a black Chrysler, blocking the parking lot exit. The hairs on the back of his neck started to prickle, but he pushed the feeling down. Paranoia was for amateurs. Frank Sinatra slowly turned around. Even from 50 yards away, Tommy could see something change in the man's posture. The drunk stumble was gone. The broken son had vanished. What remained was something else entirely. Something that had commanded stages from Vegas to New York. Something that made grown men in expensive suits speak in whispers. "Tommy." Jerry's voice cracked. We should go right now." A third car appeared, this one pulling directly behind Frank's Cadillac. 3 men stepped out, moving with the fluid precision of people who'd done this before. Tommy recognized one of them, Vincent Torino, Frank's shadow for the past 5 years, the guy who made problems disappear. Tommy's hands started shaking as he lowered his camera. The telephoto lens suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd photographed Frank dozens of times. Sure, there'd been shouting, maybe a bodyguard stepping forward, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. "Mr. Scalise." The voice came from directly behind him. Tommy spun around to find Vinnie Torino standing 3 feet away, having materialized from the shadows like smoke. Up close, the man looked like an accountant. Medium height, thinning hair, glasses, except for his eyes. His eyes belonged to someone who'd seen things that would keep ordinary people awake for decades. "Vincent, hey, listen." Tommy's voice came out higher than he intended. "Look, I was just doing my job, nothing personal. Frank's a public figure and Mr. Sinatra would like a word." Vinny's tone was conversational, almost polite. "About the photographs you just took, and about what you said regarding his father." Jerry had already started backing away, camera hanging forgotten around his neck. Smart kid. Tommy wished he'd had the same instinct, but the photos in his camera represented 3 months' rent, maybe more. Premium shots of Frank Sinatra at his lowest moment were tabloid gold. "The photos are mine," Tommy said, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. "First Amendment, Vincent. You can't just—" Vinny smiled then, and Tommy immediately wished he hadn't. It was the kind of smile undertakers probably practiced in mirrors. "Mr. Scalise, you seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation." Vinny gestured toward the black cars. More men had emerged, all wearing the same dark suits, all moving with that same unsettling precision. "I assure you it's not." Tommy's mouth went dry. He looked toward Jerry, but his assistant had disappeared entirely, probably halfway to his car by now. The smart play was to hand over the film, take whatever beating was coming, and chalk it up to the cost of doing business in Hollywood. Photographers got roughed up sometimes. It came with the territory. But 3 months' rent was 3 months' rent. And Frank Sinatra, grief or no grief, didn't own the First Amendment. Go to hell, Vincent. Tommy clutched his camera tighter. You want the film, you'll have to take it. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours. Somewhere in the distance, a slot machine finally rang out a jackpot, the sound thin and lonely in the desert air. Vinnie Torino studied Tommy's face with the methodical attention of someone reading a newspaper. Mr. Scalise, Vinnie said finally, his voice carrying an odd note of what might have been regret. I want you to understand something very clearly. What happens next isn't about the photographs. It's about the fact that you mocked a man's grief over his dead father. There are some lines you don't cross. Not in Frank Sinatra's world. Tommy opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Because he could see it now, in Vinnie's eyes, in the positioning of the cars, in the way the desert night itself seemed to be closing in around them. This wasn't about money, or photographs, or even respect. This was about consequences. Vinnie Torino had replayed that moment 1,000 times over the past 34 years. The way Tommy Scalise's face had drained of color in the parking lot lights. The sound of his breathing getting shallow and quick. The exact weight of the camera in Vinnie's hands after they'd pried it from Tommy's grip, heavier than it should have been, like it was made of lead instead of metal and glass. What he never replayed was what came after. Some memories were better left buried in the Nevada desert. Now, in the early morning quiet of his Palm Springs office, Vinnie sat nursing his second cup of coffee and watching dust motes dance in the slanted sunlight streaming through Venetian blinds. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he kept sipping it anyway. At 75, routine was about the only thing that kept the ghosts at bay. Torino Investigations occupied a modest strip mall suite between a tax preparation service and a shop that sold crystals to tourists. Not exactly the glamorous Hollywood ending he'd once imagined for himself, but it paid the bills and kept him busy enough to avoid thinking too much about the old days. Most of his clients were retirees who needed someone found, usually adult children who'd stopped calling, or old army buddies from Korea. Clean work, simple work. The kind where nobody got hurt. The bell above his door chimed, and Vinnie looked up to see his granddaughter backing through the entrance, balancing a cardboard tray of coffee cups and what looked like enough pastries to feed half of Palm Springs. Morning, Grandpa. Sophia set the tray down on his desk and leaned over to kiss his forehead. At 26, she had her grandmother's dark eyes and quick smile, though Maria had been gone 8 years now. Sometimes when Sophia laughed, Vinnie could almost pretend the past hadn't happened the way it did. You didn't need to bring breakfast, sweetheart. I already had. He gestured toward his cold coffee. That's not breakfast. That's punishment. She unpacked a blueberry muffin and slid it across the desk. Besides, I was already up. Had to drop off rental applications at 3 different places this morning. Vinnie felt something tighten in his chest. Sophia had been living in his spare bedroom for 6 months now, ever since she'd finished her teaching degree. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until she found a decent apartment she could afford on a substitute teacher's salary. But rental prices in Palm Springs had exploded over the past year, and decent places were running twice what a girl fresh out of college could manage. Not that he minded having her around. Truth was, Sophia was the only good thing he'd managed to hold on to from his old life. The only thing that made him feel like maybe, despite everything, he'd done something right. Any luck? He asked, though her expression had already given him the answer. 2 were already rented, and the third, she shrugged, unwrapping her own muffin with more force than necessary. Let's just say the landlord had some opinions about single women that belonged in 1953. Vinnie nodded, recognizing the frustration in her voice. He'd offered 6 times to help with the deposit money, but Sophia had inherited the Torino stubbornness along with everything else. She wanted to make it on her own, and he respected that. Even if it meant watching her struggle. Something will turn up, he said, meaning it. Right girl always finds the right place. Just takes time. Sophia smiled, and for a moment the office felt warmer than it had all morning. Speaking of the right place, Mrs. Chen called yesterday. Wants to hire you to find her nephew in San Francisco. Apparently he went up there for college 20 years ago and just disappeared. 20 years? Vinny raised an eyebrow. Why now? She's dying. Cancer. Sophia's voice softened. Wants to leave him her house, but she needs to find him first. The kind of case Vinny preferred. Clean motivations, clear objectives, nobody getting hurt at the end. He pulled out a legal pad and made a note to call Mrs. Chen that afternoon. What else is on the schedule? Sophia consulted a small notebook. Divorce surveillance at 2. Mrs. Patterson thinks her husband is cheating with someone from his tennis club. And tomorrow you've got that meeting with the lawyer about the Kellerman estate. Routine cases. Ordinary people with ordinary problems. The kind of life Vinny had built for himself in Palm Springs. Quiet, predictable, safe. A life where his biggest worry was whether Mrs. Patterson's husband was really sneaking around with his tennis instructor, not whether he'd have to bury evidence in the desert. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, and the sound made something flutter in Vinny's stomach. He couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the morning light looked too sharp through the blinds, or the way Sophia kept glancing at him like she was trying to read something in his expression. Or maybe it was just the weight of carrying secrets for 34 years, and the way that weight had been feeling heavier lately, like something was shifting in the foundation of the life he'd so carefully constructed. Vinny was about to respond when Sophia's phone rang, the shrill electronic tone cutting through the morning quiet like a knife. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Unknown number. She looked at Vinny. Should I let it go to voicemail? Business is business, Vinny said, though something in his gut told him to tell her yes. Let it ring. Might be a new client. Sophia answered on the 4th ring. Torino Investigations. This is Sophia. Her voice carried the professional warmth she'd perfected over the past 6 months working as his assistant. Vinny watched her face change as she listened, the color draining from her cheeks in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of Tommy Scalise in that Vegas parking lot. Let me check if he's available. She covered the phone with her palm, but Vinny could see her hands shaking. Grandpa, there's a man on the phone. Says his name is Jerry Hoffman. Says he needs to talk to you about Frank Sinatra. The coffee cup slipped from Vinny's fingers, hitting the desk with a ceramic crack that seemed to echo forever in the small office. Coffee spread across his case notes, dark stains blooming like blood across the white paper. Jerry Hoffman, Tommy Scalise's assistant. The kid who'd been smart enough to run that night in 1969, smart enough to disappear into the desert darkness before everything went to hell. Vinny's mouth had gone completely dry. Tell him I'm not available. But tell him we're closed. Vinny stood up so fast his chair rolled backward into the wall. Tell him whatever you want, but get him off the phone. Sophia stared at him for a moment, clearly seeing something in his expression that frightened her. She lifted the phone back to her ear. I'm sorry, Mr. Hoffman, but Mr. Torino is unavailable today. If you'd like to leave a... Wait. Vinny could hear the desperation in the voice bleeding through the phone, tinny and distant but unmistakable. Jerry's voice, older now but still carrying that same nervous energy that had made him run 34 years ago. Please, just tell him it's about Tommy. Tell him Tommy's dying and he wants to make things right. The words hit Vinny like a physical blow. Tommy Scalise wasn't dead. After all these years, after everything that had happened in that desert, somehow Tommy Scalise was still alive, still out there, still carrying whatever secrets had died with him that night in 1969. Except they hadn't died with him, because he hadn't died. Give me the phone. Vinny's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Sophia handed it over, her dark eyes wide with concern. Vinny cleared his throat and tried to sound like the grandfather she knew instead of the man he used to be. This is Vincent Torino. Jesus, Vinny. I wasn't sure you were still alive. Jerry's voice carried the weight of 3 decades, rough with cigarettes and regret. Look, I know this is complicated, but I need to see you. Tommy needs to see you. Tommy Scalise is dead. The words came automatically, a truth Vinny had been telling himself for so long it felt real. Has been for 34 years. No, Vinny, he's not. Jerry's voice cracked. He's been hiding. All this time he's been hiding. But he's got cancer now, stage 4, and the doctors say maybe 2 months. He wants to talk to you before it's over. Vinny closed his eyes and saw that parking lot again. The way the desert night had swallowed Tommy's screams, the weight of the shovel in his hands. Frank standing in the shadows, watching with those cold blue eyes that had made audiences swoon and enemies disappear. What does he want? To give you something. Something he's been carrying all these years. Jerry paused, and Vinny could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. He's got photos, Vinny. Not just from that night, from before, from after. Things that could hurt a lot of people if they came out. The room started to tilt sideways. Photos, evidence, proof of things that were supposed to be buried deeper than Tommy Scalise should have been. Vinny gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles went white. He's been blackmailing people? The words came out sharper than he intended. Sophia was watching him with growing alarm, and he forced himself to keep his voice level. No, nothing like that. He couldn't let go, couldn't forget, and now he wants to make it right before he dies. He wants to give everything to you, let you decide what to do with it. Vinny looked at Sophia, at her young face full of concern and innocence, at the life he'd built in this quiet desert town where his biggest worry was supposed to be cheating husbands and missing nephews. 34 years of carefully constructed normalcy, about to crumble because a dead man wanted absolution. Where is he? Barstow, Jerry's voice carried across the static. There's a hospice facility called Desert Garden. He's been there 3 weeks now. Vinny wrote down the information automatically, his hand moving while his mind reeled. Barstow was 2 hours north, close enough to the old Nevada border that the desert there would look exactly the same as it had in 1969, the same scrub brush, the same endless sky, the same kind of place where things got buried and stayed buried. I can't, Vinny started, then stopped. Sophia was still watching him, her coffee growing cold in her hands. He turned away from her, lowering his voice. I can't just drop everything and drive to Barstow because a dead man wants to chat. He's not asking for a reunion, Vinny. Jerry's tone sharpened. He's trying to clean up the mess before he goes. You of all people should understand what that means. The coffee stain on Vinny's desk had spread to Mrs. Patterson's surveillance notes, turning her husband's suspected infidelity into a brown smudge. Such a simple problem. Follow a man, take pictures, present evidence. No one had to die. No shovels required. The photos, Vinny said quietly. What exactly? Not over the phone. Jerry cut him off. But I will say this. Tommy wasn't the only photographer working that beat back then. He kept in touch with people, collected things, stories, evidence. A pause then, including some stuff about what happened to Mickey Chen. The name hit Vinny like a slap. Mickey Chen, the bartender at the Sands who'd seen too much and talked too little. Mickey who'd disappeared 2 weeks after the Tommy Scalise incident, leaving behind a wife and kid and a lot of uncomfortable questions that Frank's people had made sure never got answered. Vinny sank back into his chair. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. 34 years of careful distance from his old life, and now it was all rushing back in a single phone call. Grandpa? Sophia's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you okay? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw Maria's eyes staring back at him. Maria, who'd married him, despite knowing what he did for Frank Sinatra. Maria, who'd never asked questions about the late-night phone calls or the times he'd come home with dirt under his fingernails. Maria, who'd made him promise on her deathbed to be a better man for Sophia's sake. I need to think about this, Vinny told Jerry. There's nothing to think about. He's dying, Vinny. Whatever happened between you two, whatever you think he did or didn't deserve, it's over. He just wants to pass this stuff along before the cancer finishes him. And if I say no? The silence stretched long enough that Vinny wondered if Jerry had hung up. Finally, then I guess we find someone else to give it to. Maybe someone at the Los Angeles Times, or that Kennedy biographer who's been sniffing around Vegas stories lately. The threat was delivered casually, almost apologetically, but Vinny heard the steel underneath. Jerry Hoffman might be older now, might sound tired and worn down, but he was still the same guy who'd been smart enough to run when the cars started closing in. Smart enough to know exactly how much leverage a dying man's secrets could buy. "I'll call you back," Vinny said. "Don't take too long. Like I said, the doctors are giving him 2 months, but between you and me, I don't think he's got 2 weeks." The line went dead. Vinny set the phone down carefully, his hands steadier than they had any right to be. Muscle memory from the old days, when keeping your hands steady could mean the difference between walking away and getting walked on. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" Sophia had moved closer, her voice soft with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." More like a ghost had seen him. Tommy Scalise, reaching out from whatever hole he'd been hiding in for 34 years, wanting to unload his secrets before cancer did what Vinny should have finished in that Vegas parking lot. "It's nothing, sweetheart, just an old case. Someone I used to know." Sophia frowned. She was too smart for easy lies, had inherited too much Torino instinct for reading people. "This is about when you worked for Frank Sinatra, isn't it?" Vinny's head snapped up. They'd never talked about those days, not directly. Sophia knew he'd done security work in Las Vegas during the 60s and 70s, but he'd kept the details vague. Just another job, he'd always said. Just another paycheck. "Why would you say that?" "Because every time someone mentions his name, you get this look, like you're seeing something the rest of us can't." She sat down across from him, her coffee forgotten. What really happened back then, Grandpa? Things that would keep you awake forever, Vinny thought. Things that would change how you look at your grandfather. Things that are supposed to stay buried. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said instead. But even as he said it, Vinny knew it was already too late for that.